Hello everyone, this is a screencast on social action perspectives. This is the learning focus for this week, what are the differences between structural and action theories, what types of action theories exist, and evaluating the strengths and limitations as we do with all of the sociological theory. Okay, a brief overview. There's 4 variations of action theories. There's Weber's social action theory. There's the symbolic interactionism, phenomenology, and ethnomethodology. Action theories, regardless of whichever one it is, are micro-level theories, and these focus on voluntaristic actions and interactions of the individual rather than wider society. So it's a bottom-up approach, and this idea that we have free will and choice. Okay, so the first one we're going to look at is Max Weber's social action theory. Weber believes that we need to look at both the structural and the action approaches to fully understand our human behaviour. These two levels that we look at are the level of cause, and this is the structural factor that shape people's behaviour, so the external thing, and the level of meaning that one person applies to that cause. Okay, and it's very individual in that we have different levels of meaning based on different levels of cause. Weber believes that the level of meaning is extremely important, and that we need to understand the meanings, motives, and values of involved in each social action, and that there are different types of subjective meanings that one places upon an action or their action. Weber categorises these actions into 4 classifications. The first one is the instrumental rational action, and this is where the actor finds the most efficient means of achieving something. It's not necessarily about the desirability of the goal, it's just the most efficient way of actually achieving it. An example that we can give is about capitalism. The most efficient way of gaining maximum profits is by paying low wages. It's not necessarily about the goal at the end of the day, it's about the most efficient, easiest way of achieving the goal. The next category is the value rational action, and this is about the desirability of the goal. It's not necessarily about taking into consideration efficiency or how that goal is going to be actually achieved. It's just about knowing that this is a goal that they want to achieve, and we find it desirable and we want to achieve it. An example of this is if we know we want to achieve a goal, we try lots of different things, not knowing whether directly the things we are trying are going to help us achieve the goal, but we are aware of what the goal is. The next thing is traditional action. Now this is where we do things because of habit or routine or cultural customs, and this isn't a rational action. There's no conscious thought or choice gone into it. It's a case of, as the example says here, always done this way. It's the way we do it. So we do something because of tradition. And the last thing that Weber looks at is affectional action. And this is where an action is expressed through emotion. For instance, crying because of a death, or violence sparked by anger. You could say we've seen effectual action quite recently in terms of the general election and the emotional attachment we can put towards party members and particularly the leaders. And one of the reasons suggested that Labour didn't get in is because we didn't feel a connection with Ed Miliband. Weber believes that effectual action is very important in religious and political movements, because we have charismatic leaders who can attract followers based on their appeal to them. So for instance, a pope would generally not be an angry person who shouts at people. They are very emotional, and it's easy to connect emotionally with that person. Weber's very useful in helping us understand that there's an overemphasis, particularly from Marxist and functionalist approaches, to the structure of society and the important role that the structure plays. Weber explains that actually it's more about individual choice and how we interact and how we communicate with that action. Some criticisms though, one comes from Alfred Schutz, who believes that Weber's view is too individualistic, and it doesn't really explain shared nature of meanings. So why do people have similar meanings and similar actions attached to a specific type of action? What we mean by this is, say, the raising of a hand. Let's say you raise your hand in class and it's because to get the attention of the teacher to go to the toilet, for instance. Now, what Schutz believes is that there's a wider structural understanding of what raising the hand means. Weber doesn't explain how everyone in that room understands what this gesture means. It's also been criticised that it's very difficult to apply one action. So an example that's given is with tribes and dealing with neighbouring islands. There's a traditional action which Weber talks about because it's been practiced in the same way over generations and generations. However, it's also instrumental in that it's a way of gaining things efficiently. So the example in the book is this idea about exchanging ritual gifts. Now, the ritual gifts are a traditional action. It's something that is done between tribes and different islands. Now, but the reason why we do it is because it helps us gain trade links, etc. easier, so it means that we can actually achieve our goals in a more efficient means. And also it's been put forward that it's difficult to apply Verstein or empathetic understanding of these subjective meanings. So although we can kind of imagine what it would be like to be that person in that situation, we cannot actually truly 100% understand their meanings because we cannot be that other person. So although we might have empathy, that's based on how we think we would feel in that situation. Developing on from Weber's ideologies comes the work of George Herbert Mead and the symbolic interactionism. And this is the idea that the social world around us is actually created by our actions and interactions, and it's based very similarly on the meanings that we give to certain situations, but these are actually shown and conveyed through symbols such as language or pictures or actions. Mead compares us against animals in that our behaviour is not shaped or fixed by a pre-programmed response. We use symbols to interpret meanings. We don't respond in this pre-programmed way, we have to interpret. There's an interpretative phase that Mead talks about, and that's between the stimulus, so the action in society, for instance, and how we respond to it. Before we respond, we need to apply an interpretation and a meaning to the action so that we can act appropriately in our response. Mead believes that the way that we interpret this is by understanding what other people's meanings are, and we need to take the role of the other person to understand their meaning. So for instance, if I was to shake a clenched fist at you, you need to understand what it is I think about that, what my meaning behind it is. I could be being aggressive and showing anger or confrontation, but on the other hand I could also just be joking, and you need to understand what my meaning of the action is to be able to respond to it. And we do this in a number of ways. Young children, when they're socialising and developing, do this through role play and imitation, and especially the example that the book gives is that the role of significant others such as parents, we learn ourselves as they see us. So if we act as a parent in a role-play situation, then we can actually understand what it's like to deal with an awkward child, or a naughty child, or someone who's done something good or bad. This will help us in later life understand meanings of situations and actions. To function in the eyes of Mead as a full member of society, we need to be able to see ourselves as other people see us, and that will help us act in an appropriate way. Bloomer supports Mead's ideologies and identifies three key principles. First one is that our actions are based on meanings that we give to situations and people. So, similar to what Mead was saying before, our actions are not based on an automatic response to a stimulus. We take into consideration the meaning of it. Meanings are flexible and they can change over time, and they can change culturally, and we need to be able to understand the situation that we are in, but also be able to negotiate and change to some extent our reaction based on other things such as situation and time. Bloomer's idea obviously are very much in line with Mead and also Weber, and they contrast the ideas of functionalists who see us as having fixed responses because we act as puppets within wider society and within the system. Socialisation and social control ensure that we perform and act in society's norms and fixed ways. Bloomer argues that action is partly predictable because of where we are in the situation and surroundings, but it's not completely fixed. There's always room for negotiation, and there's always room for flexibility further on down the line. Key interactionalist theory is the labelling theory, and we've covered this in some depth in Crime and Deviance and Education last year. And this is basically where the way that we are labelled, or the people applying a label, have a great impact on how we act. And our actions are defined by the label that is placed on us. So a teacher would label a boy as troublesome, and their actions will be based on the fact that they believe that to be true. And it's important that if we believe in a label to be true, then that our actions are actually impacted. Cooley takes it a little bit further by saying that we have a looking glass self, and that's where we see ourselves as others see us. And this could lead to a self-fulfilling prophecy, because it means that instead of acting in the way that we think we should act, we act in the way that we think other people see us, and the way that we act is based on their opinion of us. Okay, what we mean by career here isn't necessarily a job, but it's actually the master status that is given to us based on a key event or thing happening. So, for instance, in terms of career, a teacher, it's not necessarily taking into consideration what they did before teaching, but their master status is a teacher. Just the same applies for a mental health patient who may be discharged from an inpatient hospital, but that label is still stuck with them, and the mental patient is their master status. Goffman's dramaturgical model is very much like if we were an actor on stage, and we have a way of acting when we are front of stage, and we have a way of acting at back of stage. So we're performing, and when we're on show. So the way that we feel when in the confines of our house and the way we act might be different to the way we act when we are in public and in front of others. Goffman believes that it is very much like a stage where there's other people, actors, and we interact differently with them, and also the props that are around us. So the social situation that we are in shapes our performance, and it's also based on the audience and what is expected of us. Our roles can change and become very distant. However, functionalists believe that we are scripted, and it's not necessarily a choice thing. It is more to do with how it is perceived that we should act in society. Some evaluation of the symbolic interactionism is that it does help us move away from deterministic theory, so it is very much shaped on our personal meanings and interactions. However, it also kind of disagrees with that same ideology in that it actually takes into consideration that other people's ideas and thoughts impact on you, so it takes away from that idea of free will, especially if we're talking about the labelling effect. People believe that ignores class inequalities and origins of labels. So Marxism believe that actually these labels are placed upon us as a result of capitalism and the class structure that we are in. So some people are going to always act in a certain way based on their social class, not necessarily because of our individual choice. It assumes change as well. However, there are sometimes constant patterns and people acting in a certain way. Functionalists believe that these patterns are a result of wider structure of society and that our behaviour is dictated to and it's not free will. Phenomenology is basically a word that is used to describe how things appear to our senses, and sociologists such as Husserl and Schutz believe that our brain, our senses, impose meaning and order of the world around us. Schutz says that we categorise these into typifications. Schutz says the first of these typifications are that meanings are very unstable and we need to contextualise the action. So an example of this would be raising your arm in class again. So it's not the actual action, it's the meaning of the action based on the context. If you were in the street and you raised your arm, then the reaction that you get to that is going to be completely different than if you were in an auction or if you were in class. This is where cultural differences are very important, because what we do, say raising our hand in Nazi Germany, has a very different meaning to, say, if we do it in an auction or in a classroom environment. And we apply these meanings through a common sense knowledge about the world around us. So we experience different things in our senses, classify them and put them into ideas, something that Schutz calls recipe knowledge. Like a recipe, we put them into a drawer and then we follow this without thinking too much about it, really, without having this prior knowledge, and we wouldn't necessarily know what to do. So for instance, the red light analogy, we know that the red light means stop, but we need to have this prior knowledge beforehand to enable us to actually act upon it. Harold Garfinkel comes up with the idea of ethnomethodology, which stems from phenomenology, and this is very much a bottom-up idea, so that social order is created by the individuals. It's constructed by individuals and not forced upon them, so it's very much against the idea of functionalists such as Parsons' view. The unclear aspect of meanings can be quite dangerous, especially for social order. So if we look at how we accomplish social order, what Garfinkel and other ethnomethodologists believe is that because meanings are unclear and unstable, we use reflexivity to apply common sense to these interactions, and then as a result we gain meaning from it. We believe that meanings are clear and obvious, and there's an obviousness to the way that we should respond to it and the meanings applied to it. And by doing this, this helps create a social order, even if the meaning isn't correct. If we believe that there is a set reaction to a certain interaction with an action, then social order is maintained. Ethnomethodology can link to several of the things that we've covered in crime and deviance and wider sociology. For instance, suicide and the use of coroners. Coroners try to make sense of deaths, and they use their common sense knowledge and also use other facts to help shape their ideas about whether or not something was a suicide. It is also linked to labelling and research methods, in that we have a preconceived idea about, based on our common sense knowledge and the reflexivity about how someone should act in a certain way and the actions that are then done as a result. Evaluations of this is that ethnomethodologists help us understand that actions construct order and meaning, and they impact on wider society, and we are not simply puppets. Crabb believes that nothing new has actually been uncovered, and that the ethnomethodology viewpoint is nothing more than just an add-on, which doesn't shed any further light on anything else that we've covered previously in terms of action theories. Functionalists criticise that they deny any wider societal influence from outside of individual opinion and action. And Marxism says that any common sense approach is actually a ruling class ideology, and it's something that the bourgeoisie have instilled into us through homogeny, through the media, education and things like that. And actually the common sense idea is to help capitalists survive. Anthony Giddens talks of a duality of structure, and that structure and actions can exist side by side, and one impacts on the other and vice versa. So actions produce a structure, and structure allows actions to happen. So the example that we've given here is that if we want to communicate using a language, you need to obey the rules of that language. Otherwise, people won't understand what it is that we're talking about. This shows how our action, the communication, depends on the existence of a structure, as in language rules. However, the language would not exist if no one used it. So the structure exists because people use the language and the action is done, and that impacts on structure. Giddens believes structure can be reproduced and changed, so human actions such as norms and customs and the resources that we have and we use change over time and can be reproduced as well. And this the same applies for agency, and agencies change powers and laws, but they also reproduce them as well to keep social control in place. This could be for reasons because of globalisation, a more diverse society, etc., etc. An evaluation of Giddens is that Archer says that structure can resist change, so it is possible for any change of norms and values to actually be resisted, and this could be due to, in many ways, this could be because of agency action and police and law controls to stop change from actually happening. Crabb says it also fails to actually explain what happens in society, it just explains what we find in society, not a reason behind it. Sorry again about the length of the video this week. I do try to make them as short as possible, but we have got lots to cover. Make sure you bring your notes to the class, and we'll be applying, interpreting and analysing these ideas in class. Thank you, bye.